Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to welcome all our viewers on live stream. It's great that you can be able to join us at home wherever you are, but most of all, it's nice seeing face-to-face people here, and it's great to be able to worship here face-to-face together. So it's terrific to be able to do that today, and to also to celebrate communion. It's been a wee while since we've done that, hasn't it? It's been a long time. This morning, what I want to be able to look at is our journey of faith, and for us, time is the most valuable commodity that we have, because once you run out of it, that's it. That's it. Time is the most valuable commodity, and sometimes we perceive our Christian walk as all good, but what we need at the end of the day is to be able to have a faith that has substance. So we'll unpack a wee bit of that this morning. But first of all, I just want to be able to just share with you, Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. And he has something like a staggering 179 billion at last count. You know, I thought that these figures were just absolutely staggering. He was the first centibillionaire. Oh, that was a new word that I learned, a centibillionaire, right? So he was the first one, in other words, to get to $100 billion. And then in 2019, he jumped to 200 billion, but, you know, divorce and stock market and such is life. His fortune plummeted to a paltry 179 billion. Tough life, isn't it? You know, he makes, the average person makes around about 1.2 million in their lifetime. He does that in 17 minutes. 17 minutes. He's earned all you have in a lifetime. What do you do with all that money? His fortune is greater than the GDP of Luxembourg, Iceland and Sri Lanka combined. Entire countries, you know. And he earns something like $2,200 a second. That would pay my visa in 5 minutes. Keep your calculators and your handbags, everyone. Anyway, enormous amount of money. But what do you do with this kind of money? Well, glad you asked. Anyway, that's old Jeff Bezos there. This is one of his ranches in Texas and Longhorn. Naturally has a few luxury properties scattered around, but this $165,000 acre property there, he runs a space program. And he gets about $500 million from the US government to run a space program there for reusable rockets. And so they conduct research on that. And mate, of course this is what you do in your backyard, isn't it? I was happy with skyrockets as a kid. But, you know, when you're a billionaire, this is the kind of stuff that you have, you know. It's, yeah, got a reusable rocket in my backyard. What have you got in your backyard? Weeds? Well, anyway, but that's not all. That's not all what he's going to do in his backyard. He's actually building, this is the top end, a 10,000-year-old clock, or that will last 10,000 years. Now, that was a shaft that they built in the clock down. The shaft itself is around about 500-600 feet deep there. And so this is the life-size clock that was supposed to run for 10,000 years. And looking down, they're assembling it. It's not completed yet. This clock is supposed to cost around about $43 million. No doubt will blow out to that. These are the cogs there. And this is how you wind it up. But this is created by Jeff Bezos' foundation called Long Now. And that is funding that. This is a life-size rendition of the clock that's in the London Museum. And this clock has all sorts of features on it, you know, a 10,000 clock, the clock that's supposed to last 10,000 years. It has, you know, the stars in the solar system, and it all does fancy things like that. But it does some unusual things. Most of your watches tick once every second. This ticks once a year, once per year. The hand moves once per 100 years. And this shaft has various chambers in it, and the cuckoo, so to speak, comes out once every 1,000 years. And so it only goes cuckoo 10 times, so to speak. And within those things, how that will map out will be for future generations. But, mate, you wouldn't want to miss the moving of the hand, would you? You know, you're rushing over there, oh, I want to see the hand, but once every 100 years, oh, I missed it. You know, or once every tick. You know, and this is going to be a tourist operation, you know, where people come out and have a look at this clock, and now you're busting with a question. Why? Why would you... $43 million and a whole lot more, no doubt, for a clock. Well, yeah, it is ridiculous, isn't it? Why is he doing this? Well, the Long Now Foundation put out this statement here. I cannot imagine the future, but I care about it. I know I am a part of a story. Isn't this nice? It's lovely. It's part of a story that starts long before I can remember and continues long beyond and when anyone will remember me. I sense that I'm alive at a time of important change, and I feel a responsibility to make sure that the change comes out well. I plant my acorns knowing that I'll never live to harvest the oaks. Now, that's all nice and saying that we're all part of a story. Yes, we are. We're all part of time, but where do we sit in that time? You know, yes, we do plant oak trees. Maybe we won't see that oak tree be harvested, but we do have a choice whether we become a part of God's harvest or not. That's why time is so important. Now, he went on to say that he wanted this clock here to be a monument to long-term thinking, and for people to be mindful where they are in the arc of history and time. One of the important things that people don't do today is to think. Is to think about the big things in life. Most people think about just day-to-day activities. But where do we fit in God's plan? God's plan of eternity, God's will. Thinking is really critical. Solomon sort of hit the nub on the head a little bit. If we go to Ecclesiastes 7 verse 2, if we go to Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 2, and he says this here. It is better to, in Ecclesiastes 7 verse 2, and so if you sort of Psalm, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, says 7 verse 2, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. So, just reading that passage again. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. Solomon's hardly a party man, is he? So it's better for you to go to a funeral than to go to a party. Well, he's a lot of fun, isn't he? Why? Because and I've taken a few funerals over the time. Funerals are time when people start to think about the bigger picture of life. when you're in your 20s, you're immortal. When you're 30, you're still immortal. 40, starting to slow down and spread out a little bit more. 50, still doing it. But when you're starting to get, 60 odd, mortality starts to sort of creep up on you a little bit. And you start to think about the bigger things, bigger picture in life. And so funerals help you to think about that. Bezos' clock is there to help us to think about time, where we fit in the arc of history and time. We are living in a part of history, in the world's history, that is very significant. Prophetically, it is significant. We don't know how long time goes on for. That's not the point. But where do we fit in now? Because we don't know when our time is up. Time is the most important commodity that we have. Let us make sure that we make use of it. There's an interesting scenario that happened in Luke chapter 19 that really kind of puzzles me in many ways. In Luke chapter 19, and this is round about the triumphant entry of Jesus. The people were excited. This was the time of the Passover. This is, kind of around about the start of the week before the crucifixion, so there's still a few more events to happen before the crucifixion. But this is the time of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and then Jesus cleanses the temple again for a second time, and then he has his time with his disciples ahead of his rest and his crucifixion. So let us have a wee look at Luke chapter 19 and verse 28. Luke 19, verse 28. After he said these things, he was going on ahead, going up to Jerusalem, and when he approached Bethphage and Bethany, near the mount there that is called Olivet, he sent 2 disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you, and there as you enter you'll find a colt tied, which no one yet has ever sat to untie it, and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it, you shall say, the Lord needs of it. The Lord has need of it." So those who were sent away found it just as he had told them, and they were untying the colt, and its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said to him, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus, and they threw their coats on the colt, and they put Jesus on it. As he was going, they were spreading their coats on the road, and as soon as he was approaching near the descent of Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice of all miracles they had seen, and shouting, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Now, you imagine that. Jesus himself sitting there on the donkey and coming into the town, and people laying down their coats, and the crowd is joyfully looking forward to him, accepting him as the Messiah. And there was a loud commotion, and then the Pharisees were so concerned about that, in the next verse, that some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." But Jesus answered, "I tell you, if these become silent, the stones will cry out." And when he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city, and he what? He wept over it. This triumphal entry that Jesus entered, he entered on a colt or a donkey, and you go, a donkey doesn't look very kingly, does it? You would sort of think, well, maybe a horse, a white one, maybe. Why a donkey? A horse was an animal of war. associated with war. A donkey was associated with peace, and kings used it, and so people understood that this was a moment in time of the Messiah arriving, and the people were going, "Oh, you beauty, the Messiah's here. All what we have waited for hundreds of years, this is our moment. This is our moment." But the Pharisees, "Oh, no, come on, calm down. The Romans are going to get upset, blah, blah, blah." And they were trying to calm the crowd down. Something strange happens. This is the part I really struggle with. Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23. And this was before Pilate's hall. And if we just go to verse 16 of chapter 23, therefore, Luke chapter 23, verse 16, "Therefore I will punish him and release him," Pilate says. Now he was obliged to release to them at the feast one prisoner. And Pilate was kind of hoping that they would choose to release Jesus and not this particular prisoner. In verse 18, "But they cried out all together, saying, 'Away with this man,'" about Jesus, "'release for us Barabbas.' And he was the one who'd been thrown into prison for an insurrection made in the city and for murder. And Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them, saying, again, but they kept on calling out, saying, 'Crucify him, crucify him.'" Now, this is the part that I can't understand. This was the same crowd that welcomed Jesus, sung hosannas, and says, "This is our Messiah." And now, several days later, they're saying, "Crucify him, crucify him. Away with this man." Crucifixion was the most cruel punishment. They drove nails through the Achilles' heels, nails through the hands, and you were stripped down naked. That was the cruelest and most inhumane punishment that they could give, and they cried out, "Crucify him." What happened? What happened in that time between when they were praising God to crucifying him? They still believed in Jesus, did they not? They still believed in God, did they not? They still believed in the coming of the Messiah, did they not? Weren't they still Adventist? Didn't they have some kind of faith? What happened? Odd, isn't it? Do you ever wonder, this clock is to get people thinking about time. Do you ever wonder the same could happen to you when the final part of time winds up? That you will chuck it all in and walk away? There's something that we need in our relationship with God that will get us through that. There's something missing in that faith of these people who cried out that they needed, that they didn't have or didn't want. We like to surround ourselves with perceptions of Christianity versus substance. We like to put around ourselves the perceptions that everything is all okay in order to dull a conscience. I'll give you an example from America, and this is really odd. This is really odd. Now, these are gambling chips. And it says here, all in, Jesus went all in for you, John 3:16. Gambling chips, casinos, to try and get people to put it all in. Faith, I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Isn't it nice to have Bible texts on gambling chips? Odd, isn't it? There was another chip, and I don't know if I got the picture on this one. Up your ante as Jesus gave his all, up your ante as Jesus gave his all. I just go, and I sort of scratch my head, and you'll be saved. And another Bible text. Here we go, cross pops, food. Cross pops? Just little lollies, Jesus' body, pencil toppers, wash away your sins. This is Jesus' bubble bath. And you go, oh, fair income. You know what the rationale for this is? You know what the rationale? In John chapter 1, that Jesus is the Word. Does anyone know what the Greek word for word is? This is the first Greek word that you learn at college. And it's logos. Logos, meaning word. And their idea is, well, logos, get this, logo. And so if you have all these logos around you, this will help to incarnate Jesus into your life. That is the rationale. To me, I think that's just ludicrous, and we think that's stupid. And this is, antidepressant. Oh, yeah, anyway. How do we create our own perceptions? Now, we don't go with that kind of consumerism, but we can create our own perceptions to prevent us from thinking about the hard questions. We can create our own perceptions to make us feel good. I am not so bad, I am pretty good. And we define our own way, and we define how much we give to God. Are we willing to place our all on the altar? But we create our own perceptions that I'll only give so much. And underneath, our motives betray our real intent. Yes, we may want to serve God, but we'll serve him on my own terms. And so we'll create our own perceptions around that in order to dull, ameliorate, and squash those feelings to say that God is prompting us to give more. Well, I'll only do this much. I'll do this or I'll do that. What perceptions do we create around us that says, I am okay, when perhaps we may not be? We must have a faith of substance. You see, one of the things that went wrong for the people back then is that they were just fans of Jesus. A little bit like fans of a football team, rugby team, NRL, all that sort of thing. People know about certain players. And what do they know about them? They know how tall he is. They know about his family, how many tries he's scored, how long he's been in the team for, how much he's earned. They know about him. They don't know him personally. But by being associated with that person, people live vicariously through that person. People were fans of Jesus at the time because of what they were hoping that Jesus would do for them, but he turned around not to. Jesus wanted to create followers, not fans. So the first problem comes to Matthew chapter 15. And the first problem is Matthew the first problem, Matthew chapter 15 and verse 8. This people, they honour me with their lips, but what? Their heart is far from me. So, if our heart is far from God, we can honour God with our lips. And if our heart is far away from, we can create these perceptions around us, all these things around us, to say, oh, it's all okay. Each individual person has their own things that they put around them. What we need is a faith of substance. Let's come to James chapter 2. James chapter 2. And this is probably one of the more difficult sections of Scripture for Adventists to wrestle with. But we won't spend too long dissecting it. Verse 14 of chapter 2, James, What use is it, my brethren, if someone says his faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and you do not give them what it is necessary for their body, what use is that? Even so, faith, if it has no works, is dead and being by itself. But someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without the works and I'll show you my faith without my works. You believe in God, you believe that God is one, you do well. The demons believe and shudder. Now, for Adventists, faith, works, show me your works by your faith, and we all get lost in the works and the faith and grace, and we get buried alive in it. And the Pharisees got buried alive in that passage, in that as well. Faith and works, they defined their Christianity by their works. They created those perceptions around them that they were okay because they did this, this, this and this. They kept all 633 laws of the Sabbath. They kept every other commandment around tithing, and they got themselves so far tied up in knots that they couldn't even see God at the end of the day. They created all these perceptions that they were okay and they missed out on God. The people who praised God created also perceptions around them and they missed out on the Messiah. So, faith and works. How does all that work? A faith of substance. And for Adventists, we have focused on laws around the Sabbath. And I believe that the key to understanding this is found in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7. And reading from verse 21. And this is a passage that we know very well. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name and cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles. Now, these are very significant things. To prophesy, to cast out demons, and to do miracles. How many miracles? These are very, very significant things. We don't see miracles very often, do we? We don't sit in our church services and have prophetic messages that are rung out from the back pews. Don't recall casting out demons in our church service either. But what is Jesus' next words? What does he say? And then I will declare to them, I, what? Never knew you. So how does this relate to James? You see, in James we get lost on the faith and the works thing. That wasn't James' point. James is contrasting and comparing wrong faith versus faith of substance. Well, if you believe, well, so what? The devils believe. At least they admit it. Many don't. Many human people don't. A faith of substance is, James is talking about the quality of faith. He's talking about the kind of faith that produces works. Works is not the cause of faith. Works is not the cause of our salvation. Works flows out of our faith relationship. And in Matthew 7 verse, in what we've just read, and he says, I never knew you. So it is out of our faith relationship with God. In our relationship, we produce, God through his Spirit produces the good works that comes out. Are you with me? Does that make sense? Yeah. Too often we focus on the works thing, don't we? Yeah. Works comes out of the fruits of the Spirit. You know, Jesus gave the example of the fig tree. Looks good on the outside, but no figs. The figs can only be produced when it's connected to the tree. The vine, we can only produce fruits of the Spirit when we are connected to the vine. We can only produce good works when we are connected to God. He says, get away from me, I never knew you. Faith of substance comes from that relationship with God. Time is the most valuable commodity that we have, but time robs us of that relationship with God because of all the things that must pile on day to day. And so our relationship with God tends to suffer at the expense of everything else that goes on. You see, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, he wept because he knew that these people who were welcoming him as king would then yell out, crucify him, crucify him. You see, and then there's the days that followed on, the emotion that was created with that slowly dissipated. And the people then started to think, well, really, is he the Messiah? Am I imagining things? Maybe he's not. Maybe I misunderstood. Nothing much is happening. Where is my faith in through that maelstrom and trying to work that through? Do you understand what I'm saying? How do you work your faith through a situation where you can't see what is going to happen at the end? It wouldn't be faith if you knew. That's what faith is all about, trusting God that he'll work it out. We may not have all the details worked out. Nicodemus was working this through too. He would have been around, he would have been seeing what was happening. In John chapter 3, he's sussing all this out. And he would have remembered what Jesus said, when the Son of Man be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. Unto me. And so when he was crucified and when Jesus did die on the cross, there was Nicodemus. There he was, because he remembered what he said. You see, Nicodemus had to work through that as well. And when you have a faith of substance, you can work it through. But we've got to have a faith of substance that only comes from as we relate to God. You know, Andre Agassi was one of the greatest tennis players, even though he only won 8 championships. But he was world former number one. He's still married to Steffi Graf after 18 years, which is terrific. And but you know, he was one of the good guys in tennis. He didn't have a huge personality. Wasn't like a John McEnroe that had a huge personality on the circuit. I'll show my age here. But you know, a few blank looks here. John who? But anyway. But you know, he wasn't a great personality on the tennis circuit, but he was a great player, and his father just trained him to be a really good tennis player. You know, he would spend hours and hours and hours with him. You know, when he was a kid and he was just hitting the ball back, he would get tired. How much longer, Dad? How much longer? He'll call him Pops. How much longer? And the father wouldn't answer him. You just got to keep playing, son. Just got to keep playing. And so he would fake a shot. He would hit the rim and it'd be launch over the fence there, and then his father would chase it, and he would find relief for 4.5 minutes while his father went and fetched the ball. How does a person become world number one when they hate tennis? How do you become world number one when you hate tennis? Masking. He devoted it to his sport, but he hated tennis. For years and years he hated it, but he performed to the best of his ability, etc., etc. Going through the motions. You've got to have a faith of substance. You've got to have something more. You know, sometimes we hate coming to church. We dislike it. But the thing that Andre Agassi said, that the reason why he didn't enjoy tennis was because he did not choose it. He did not choose it. Let's come to John chapter 6. And in John chapter 6, verse 37. John chapter 6 and verse 37. And this is a passage we looked at on Monday night and in our Bible study. But this is a beautiful passage. John chapter 6 verse 37. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will certainly not cast out. And the beautiful part about this is that all that the Father gives me, and so, you know, there's this entire group or the world of people that the Father gives to Jesus, and what comes next is lost to us in the Greek. So you got this great big group of people that the Father gives to Jesus that he came to save. And so the Greek there is looking at plural, but what comes next is fascinating. And the one who comes to me, I will certainly not cast out. And the point here that the Greek changes from the plural to the singular. And so you go, all that the Father gives to me, but the one who comes to me, I will not cast out. Singular. God gives the group of people, but the choice is ours. Andre Agassi didn't like tennis because he did not choose it. God gives us the option to choose him. In order to build a substance of faith, we must choose him each day, over and above everything else that happens. Let us choose him today. We're going to celebrate communion now. And so this brings to an end our live stream. I want to thank you for joining us today. But for communion, this may be new to a couple of you. But I don't want to rave on. We're doing all the precautions that the government have recommended. So foot washing will be in the usual place. Room on the side and the ladies in the hall. And we just ask that you just